I sat there in silence as my daughter-in-law laughed across the table. "Look out, the cripple cometh," she said, raising her wineglass like it was a joke. My son didn't say a word, not a glance, not a protest. After raising him, loving him, helping him build the life he now protects from me, I was nothing but a burden in a wheelchair. But what they didn't realize was that I may have lost my legs, not my power. And with one signature, I erased their future. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The echo lingered longer than the words themselves, sliding down the polished wood floors of Ginny Barrington's dining room. She had thought she was ready for this moment, for the instant when her new wheelchair would be noticed, commented on, perhaps pitied. What she hadn't braced for was the way Trina would weaponize it. The chair itself had been chosen with care. Midnight blue frame, narrow enough to glide between antique sideboards, custom cushions in cream that matched her parlor curtains. It was quiet, elegant, and entirely hers. Yet in Trina's mouth, it became a spectacle. "Look out," Trina said with a smirk that tightened her face like a mask. "The cripple cometh." There were 6 people at the table that night: Ginny, Micah, Trina, Lila, and 2 of Micah's colleagues who had stopped by after a showing. The colleagues had wine glasses half raised when Trina's words landed. One gave a brittle laugh, the other coughed into his napkin. Micah said nothing, adjusting his cufflinks like he hadn't heard a thing. Ginny didn't look up. She studied the linen napkin in her lap, her fingers smoothing the folded edge until the cotton warmed beneath her touch. Her silence was deliberate, heavy enough that the candles on the table seemed to flicker under it. From her left, a small hand reached under the tablecloth. Lila's fingers, cool and steady, closed around hers. 16, but already sharper than most adults in the room, Lila didn't look at her grandmother directly. She just held on. Across the table, Trina kept her smile stretched, like someone performing for invisible cameras. "Hope we don't have to widen the door frames, Your Highness," she added, pouring herself more Chardonnay. The joke dangled in the air, then collapsed into a silence no one dared acknowledge. Dinner moved on in fragments. Clinking silver, murmured real estate chatter, a mention of the Charleston humidity thickening early this year. Ginny chewed slowly, tasting nothing. The roasted chicken could have been cardboard, the buttered beans, wax. All she could register was the echo of Trina's laugh, bouncing and bouncing until it lived behind her eyes. When the guests finally excused themselves, when the front door shut and Micah kissed Trina's cheek as if she were flawless, Ginny wheeled herself toward the living room without a word. The blue chair rolled smoothly over the brick-patterned rug, silent where the house was not. Behind her, she could still hear Trina's laughter ghosting the corners of the dining room. She paused beneath the wide portrait window, hands resting on the wheels, her nails pressed against the cool metal rim. The old her might have spoken up, demanded an apology, struck back with a comment so sharp it left scars. But the old her had stood on legs that no longer obeyed. This Ginny understood the weight of silence. Later that night, when the house settled into its humid hush and the Barringtons upstairs went quiet, Ginny placed her phone on the nightstand. She had forgotten it was recording during dinner, a habit she'd picked up in recent months, not for spying but for memory. Sometimes details slipped. Dates blurred. She had told herself it was precaution, nothing more. Her finger hovered over the screen. Play. Trina's voice filled the room, bright and cutting. "The cripple cometh." Then the laughter, layered and awkward, a chorus of people trying not to be complicit, yet failing. Micah's silence followed, its weight almost louder than the laughter itself. Ginny leaned back against her pillows, listening again and again. Each replay pressed the insult deeper, but it also carved something solid in her chest, something colder than hurt. She slid the phone into her bedside drawer, labeling the file in her mind. Barrington Archive. Dinner, September. Her lips didn't move, but her eyes did. They narrowed, steady and deliberate, like someone sharpening a blade on a stone. Tonight, Trina thought she had gotten away with mockery. Tomorrow, Ginny knew, the record would say otherwise. The glow of the phone screen cut through the dark bedroom. Ginny leaned forward in her bed, robe tied tight, the air heavy with Charleston's midnight humidity. The recording still played, Trina's voice crisp, venom dressed as humor. The laughter that followed wasn't just sound, it was evidence. Ginny pressed pause. Her fingers, thin but steady, opened the Files app and created a new folder. She named it with care, Barrington Archive. The title felt both clinical and deliberate, as though she were curating an exhibit no one wanted to see, but that would someday matter. One by one, she uploaded the audio clips, then scrolled back and replayed the insult, this time transcribing it in her small, neat handwriting into a leather-bound ledger she'd once used for antique appraisals. She marked the timestamp down to the second. Then she added the second remark. "Hope we don't have to widen the door frames, Your Highness," complete with the mocking tone. The ledger sat open across her lap, ink still drying. She pressed her hand flat on the page, the way she used to when sealing a deal over a mahogany counter, reminding herself, "I've kept records all my life. This is no different." The floor creaked outside her room. A soft knock followed. Lila slipped in, hair mussed from sleep, holding a chipped teacup with steam curling upward. Chamomile, Ginny could smell it before the cup touched her nightstand. "Grandma," Lila whispered, sliding onto the edge of the bed. Her voice carried none of Trina's brittle performance, only warmth. "It's not okay. I'm sorry." Ginny closed the ledger slowly, her expression unreadable. She lifted the cup, the ceramic warm against her palms. "You saw it. You heard it. And you know what silence costs in this family." Lila's eyes glistened in the dim light. "I won't be silent. Not if you need me." Ginny reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her granddaughter's forehead. "I hope you never have to prove that. But life has a way of making us prove things." The room smelled faintly of ink, tea, and the lingering lavender sachet she kept in the drawer. Outside, the city hummed faintly, the distant rumble of a late-night boat horn drifting up the Cooper River. By morning, the house smelled of coffee and fried eggs from Trina's kitchen downstairs. Ginny waited until she left for her yoga class before calling Rose. Within the hour, Rose arrived, cane tapping against the brick walk before her. She stepped into the room without ceremony, her silver hair pulled into a tight twist, eyes already narrowed. "Play it," Rose said, lowering herself into the wing-back chair by the window. Ginny obliged. The recording filled the air again. Trina's laugh bounced between the walls, more unbearable in daylight than it had been in the dark. Rose didn't flinch, but her jaw set hard, her fingers tapping once against the head of her cane. When the clip ended, Rose leaned forward. "It wasn't the first time." "No," Ginny answered, voice calm, almost icy. "But it'll be the last." The two women sat in silence. A long pause waited with the years of friendship between them. The antique shows, the long drives, the shared victories of finding hidden value in overlooked things. Rose finally exhaled, sharp and decisive. "You know what time it is then?" Ginny's eyes flicked to the oak dresser against the wall. She set her teacup aside, wheeled closer, and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside, wrapped in a manila envelope, lay her original will. She placed it on her lap, the paper heavier than it looked. The sunlight slanted across it, a thin golden blade cutting through the room. Ginny traced her finger along the seal, the corners already softened from age. "Yes," she murmured, "it's time." The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have. Ginny laid it across her desk, smoothing the flap with careful hands. She had written this will 5 years earlier, before her diagnosis, when the Barrington name still meant stability and family dinners didn't leave bruises. Back then, she'd been generous, too generous. The paper smelled faintly of ink and storage dust. She slid out the document and unfolded the pages one by one. The house, her Charleston brick front with its wrought iron balcony, was to go to Micah. The antiques business profits would be split between him and Trina, for the benefit of their shared household. Her jewelry collection, her savings accounts, even the deed to the storage warehouse, all neatly divided. Ginny reached for a red pen, the kind she had once used to mark which pieces of furniture were authentic and which were clever fakes. Now she circled every line where Trina's name was implied. Benefits by marriage, by assumption, by default. Circle after circle. The page grew marked, the red bleeding like warning. Flares. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint tick of the grandfather clock down the hall. She flipped through every clause, every signature line, her eyes narrowing. This wasn't just a document. It was a map showing exactly where Trina had planted her stakes, counting on the soil of Ginny's legacy to feed her future. By the time Rose arrived that afternoon, Ginny had a neat stack of papers and a growing resolve. Rose took one look at the pages and snorted, her cane resting against the arm of the chair. "They think it's theirs already," Rose said, voice edged like her polished mahogany cane. "They've mistaken patience for weakness," Ginny replied, her tone even but firm. Rose leaned closer, her perfume faintly citrusy, eyes sharp. "You need a man who doesn't swing an axe." "You need a scalpel," Ginny looked up. "You know someone." "Eric Lawson," Rose said without hesitation. "Estate law. Charleston born and bred. He's scalpel, not hammer. I've seen him gut a greedy nephew without breaking a sweat." Ginny let the idea settle. A name, a direction, a way forward. They set the appointment for Tuesday morning. The decision was made with the kind of quiet finality Ginny had once used when bidding on antiques. Controlled, deliberate, without flourish. That evening, the doorbell rang. Trina breezed in, arms full of grocery bags, her smile bright enough to hurt. "I thought I'd drop off some things," she chirped, setting apples and cartons of almond milk on the counter. "You know, help lighten your load." Ginny watched from her chair, saying nothing. Trina's tone was saccharine, but her movements betrayed her, rushed, jerky, like a woman staging a performance without rehearsal. She stacked cans too quickly, straightened them twice, then turned with a practiced grin. "You're doing okay, right?" Trina asked, tilting her head in mock concern. Ginny let her paws stretch until it nearly snapped. Then she offered a single nod. Her expression unreadable. Trina hesitated, then laughed too brightly. "Well, I'll let you rest. Don't want to wear out the royal wheels." She touched Ginny's shoulder, a brush too light to be affection, and slipped out as quickly as she'd come. The air smelled of her perfume, too sweet, clinging to the groceries she left behind. Ginny waited until the sound of Trina's car faded before rolling back to her desk. She reopened the will, tapped her pen against the red circles, and felt a calm resolve harden inside her chest. Later that night, when Ginny went to her bedroom, a folded slip of notebook paper sat on her nightstand. Her first thought was that Trina had left some shallow thank you note, but when she opened it, the handwriting was small, precise, and familiar. "Want me to testify someday? I will." It was Lila's. Ginny stared at the words, her throat tightening. The room seemed to grow sharper, the crickets outside louder, the faint smell of paper and ink more pronounced. The will sat in the drawer, marked and waiting, but now she understood she had something stronger than documents or signatures. She had a witness. The estate office sat above an old Charleston bank, its brick facade weathered and proud. Ginny's chair hummed softly against the marble floor of the lobby as she crossed to the elevator. The air smelled faintly of brass polish and old paper, a scent she associated with permanence. By the time the elevator doors opened, she'd already steadied her breathing. This wasn't weakness. This was a transaction. Eric Lawson's office was paneled in oak, the blinds half tilted against the morning sun. He rose when Ginny entered, tall but not imposing, with kind eyes behind his glasses. What struck her first was what he didn't do. He didn't speak slowly, didn't lean down as if she were a child, didn't ask if she needed help maneuvering her chair. "Mrs. Barrington," he said simply, extending his hand. His grip was firm but not crushing. "I'm glad Rose sent you my way." Ginny returned the handshake. meeting his gaze directly. She said you don't waste time. Then let's not. She reached into her leather satchel and slid 2 documents across the desk. The neatly folded old will and her red-marked printout, circles blazing like wounds. Eric scanned the pages in silence, his brow furrowing only slightly. His pen tapped once against his legal pad, then stilled. They assumed you'd keep this as is, he said. They assumed wrong, Ginny replied, voice even. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. We'll use a trust. Clean, final, enforceable. If you want airtight protection, this is the way. Ginny tilted her head, her eyes sharp, and a no contest clause. They will try. Eric's lips quirked. Approval, not amusement. Good. You know the battlefield. That clause will make sure anyone who challenges loses everything. No halfway fights. He began sketching the structure on a yellow legal pad, his pen moving in quick, precise strokes. House, investments, antiques, savings, all to be placed into a trust. No direct handholds left for Micah or Trina to cling to. Ginny listened, the scratch of the pen loud against the otherwise quiet room. She could smell the faint aroma of his black coffee cooling beside him, the steam dissipating as his plans solidified. And the beneficiary? Eric asked, glancing up. Lila, Ginny said without hesitation, but not until 25. She needs time to live without a target on her back. Eric nodded. Wise? And trustee? Rose, Ginny answered. She didn't even blink. That drew the faintest smile from him. Trustees need to be both loyal and immovable. Rose's both. Ginny's chair creaked slightly as she shifted, her hands steady on the wheel rims. I built a life cataloging value. I know what's genuine and what's imitation. Trina is imitation. I won't leave my legacy in her hands. Eric adjusted his glasses, then pushed the pad across to her. This plan gives you complete control. They can posture, they can whine, they can try manipulation. None of it will matter. The office seemed to grow warmer. The morning light spilling across the desk, highlighting the edges of the red circles Ginny had drawn at home. She reached for the pen, tracing the outline of what Eric had written. Each word felt like armor. For the first time in days, her chest loosened. Not relief exactly, more the feeling of finally standing on ground that wouldn't shift under her. Their meeting ran another hour, each clause carefully shaped, each detail fortified. Eric's tone never slipped into condescension, never wandered into pity. He treated her not as a declining woman, but as a client with clarity and fire. That, Ginny realized, was a form of dignity she hadn't felt since before the diagnosis. When the final draft packet was stacked neatly in front of her, Eric said, "We'll meet again once everything's prepared for signature. Bring your identification and a medical capacity letter from your physician." After that, irreversible, Ginny slid the old will back into her satchel, now a relic of misplaced generosity. She met Eric's gaze. Irreversible is what I want. By the time she rolled out of the building, the Charleston air hit her like a damp cloth, warm and heavy, but inside she felt lighter. Her legacy was no longer their inheritance to assume. It was hers to weaponize. Her phone buzzed in her bag as she wheeled down the shaded sidewalk. She pulled it out, the screen glowing with Trina's name. Against her better judgment, she answered. Trina's voice came sweet as syrup. "We're redoing the guest room," she chirped. "You know, in case you decline further." Ginny stopped her chair under the shadow of a wrought iron balcony. The brick beneath, her wheels was warm, the cicadas humming like static in the trees. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good," she said softly, then ended the call. The morning of the signing broke humid and bright, sunlight pouring through the lace curtains of Ginny's bedroom. She dressed with care, as if preparing for a gallery opening. Pearl earrings, a pressed linen blouse, navy skirt that matched the trim of her wheelchair. A woman could be underestimated for her body, but never for her presentation. The satchel on her lap held the required proofs: driver's license, passport, Medical capacity letter from her neurologist with its crisp seal and precise language. Virginia Barrington demonstrates full cognitive capacity, able to understand and execute legal documents. Ginny had read the letter 3 times that morning, savoring each phrase like armor. At Eric Lawson's office, the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and fresh paper. Rose was already there, Kane leaning against the wall, eyes watchful. Lila had begged to come, but Ginny had insisted school came first. Better to keep her out of the room until the storm passed. Eric rose from behind his desk, a stack of documents neatly arranged before him. "Mrs. Barrington," he greeted, his voice steady. "Today we make it official." Ginny wheeled forward, setting the satchel on the table. "Let's begin." The trust packet was thicker than her original will, its pages humming with legal weight. Eric guided her through each section, his pen tapping lightly as he explained. Primary residence, transferred into the trust. All investment accounts consolidated here. Antiques inventory included. Catalogued as of last quarter, Ginny's finger traced the black ink headings. Each line that once tied her legacy to Micah and Trina now bypassed them entirely. "And the no contest clause," Eric said, pointing. "If either Micah or Trina challenges this, they lose even the possibility of scraps." "Good," Ginny replied, her tone cool. "Scraps would be too much." Rose chuckled softly, though her eyes stayed fixed on the papers, as if daring the world to cross her friend now. The process was meticulous. Review, initial, sign, notarize. The notary, a solemn woman with auburn hair tied in a knot, entered quietly and checked each ID with precision. Ginny signed her name in careful loops, the arthritis glove on her hand squeaking faintly against the pen. Each signature felt like chiseling stone, each initial a crack forming in the Barrington facade. Micah and Trina believed unshakable. Halfway through, Eric paused. "There's also your personal letter to the beneficiary. Do you want to add it to the packet?" Ginny nodded. From the satchel, she withdrew a cream envelope sealed in wax. Inside, she had written to Lila in her tight, elegant script. "You saw me when I wasn't convenient. This trust is yours when the time is right. Until then, trust Rose, as I have." The letter slid in too, the folder tucked among the contracts and directives. When the final signature was complete, Eric stamped the last page. The notary's seal pressed into the paper with a firm crack. The sound echoed in the paneled office like a gavel strike. "It's done," Eric said. Ginny exhaled slowly, a controlled release of weeks of quiet anger. Done. The house, the accounts, the heirlooms, all sealed beyond Micah's reach, beyond Trina's claws. Her future had been reduced in their minds to pity and decline. Instead, she had reduced theirs to nothing. Eric slid her copies into a binder, black leather, neat tabs, protective sleeves. On the spine, he wrote in careful block letters, "The Barrington Living Trust." He added, "Executor is Rose, Healthcare Proxy, Rose Primary, Lila Secondary. Housing Directive, your wishes honored. Everything is fortified." Ginny closed the binder with a decisive snap. "Good. Then if they come knocking, the only thing they'll hear is silence." Outside, the Charleston air pressed heavy again, but Ginny wheeled through it lighter than she had in months. The wheels hummed against the sidewalk, her satchel secure, her binder locked across her lap. That evening, after tea with Rose and a quiet supper, Ginny sat by the window as twilight slid over the old brick streets. She opened her phone out of habit. At the top of her feed, Trina had posted a photograph. Her, Micah, and Lila smiling stiffly in front of the dining room table. Ginny, of course, absent. The caption in bold, sugary script read, "Our growing burden. We bear it well." Ginny's lips parted, not in shock, but in something colder. She tapped the screen, saving the post to her archive, then shut the phone with a click. They thought they were documenting her decline. They didn't know she had already documented their erasure. The printer whirred in the corner of Ginny's study, its low hum cutting through the stillness of the house. A sheet slid out slowly, edges curling warm from the rollers. She lifted it with care, eyes fixed not on the faces in the staged family photo, but on the caption beneath. Managing life with our crippled matriarch. We do it with grace. The word crippled sat like a bruise across the page. No tags, no direct mention. But the cruelty was intentional, precise as a blade slipped between ribs. Ginny slid the printout into a plastic sleeve and added it to her binder right after the Our Growing Burden post she had captured the night before. One had been passive-aggressive, sly enough to pass as humor. This one was open, public malice. The escalation told its own story. By morning, Rose was seated across from her in the parlor, Kane resting against the arm of the chair, steam rising from the teacups between them. Ginny passed the binder across the table, the new page gleaming under the plastic. Rose scanned it, her expression tightening until her mouth became a hard line. "You keep stacking facts," she said finally. "Let them collapse under it." Ginny's only reply was the faint clink of her spoon against porcelain as she stirred her tea. That afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message from Lila. "Deleted my share of Mom's post." That wasn't okay. A beat later, another. "She doesn't get to humiliate you in public." Ginny stared at the words for a long moment, the glow of the screen bright against the muted afternoon light. Her granddaughter's quiet rebellion landed heavier than any court filing. She typed back, "I know, darling." And I saw. The air outside grew heavy as a storm gathered along the coast. The smell of ozone drifted in through the open window, mixing with the faint scent of paper and ink from her desk. Ginny opened the binder once more, added a handwritten note beside the printout. Intended to wound publicly. Evidence of character. She tucked the page carefully back in place and shut the leather cover. That evening, she phoned Eric. His voice came through steady, professional. But she caught the faint undercurrent of approval when she described the post. "If needed," he said, "this becomes testimony. Judges don't like seeing elder cruelty dressed up as wit. This strengthens everything." Ginny closed her eyes, picturing it. The caption projected in a quiet courtroom, the jury shifting uncomfortably. Trina's voice caught in her own web of performance. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake, it was precision. The rain started just after dusk, tapping against the windows in steady rhythm. Ginny brewed herself chamomile, the steam curling into the lamplight. She wheeled the binder into the study one last time, slid it into the fireproof safe, and spun the dial until the lock clicked into place. The sound was heavy, final, like the vault doors of the old banks downtown. When she returned to her bedroom, the house silent except for the patter of rain, her phone buzzed. An email notification pulsed across the screen. Sender, Micah Barrington. Subject, Future Care. Ginny tapped it open. "Want to talk about future care options?" She sat very still, the irony settling over her like the damp air drifting through the cracks of the old window. He thought the conversation was about her decline, her body, her needs. What he didn't know was that she had already rewritten what future care meant, and it didn't include him. The rain had barely dried from the night before when Ginny's inbox pinged with a new message. She wheeled herself to the desk, the morning sunlight spilling through the lace curtains, and clicked it open. Subject, Exploring Future Options. Micah's words unfurled in the overly polite tone of a salesman smoothing a deal. "We've been thinking about what might make things easier for you, Mom. There's a wonderful mobility-accessible senior suite opening up downtown. Everything's modernized. Ramps, elevators, medical staff on site. It could really take the pressure off you." Her jaw tightened, but she kept reading. A second email, this one from Trina, appeared beneath his. Less polished, more direct. "If you like, we'll handle the house sale for you. We can manage all the details. Listings, showings, contracts. That way you won't have to stress." Ginny sat back in her chair, the leather creaking softly. The house she had built her life in, every brick, every antique, every detail chosen by her hand, reduced to a listing Trina wanted to manage. Her gaze shifted to the binder in her safe, already fortified with signatures that made their words meaningless. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. A sharp reply tempted her, something scalding. But instead she typed only, "Thank you. I'll consider it." She added a delicate smiley face at the end, something so out of character it would read like sweetness. Then she hit send and closed the laptop with a decisive snap. Silence, she had learned, was its own weapon. That afternoon, she forwarded the entire email chain to Eric, subject line, "For archive." Within minutes, his response arrived. "Got it. Perfect paper trail." Ginny wheeled to the window, the air outside heavy with humidity, the faint scent of cut grass drifting in from the street. She watched the neighborhood children pedal by on bikes, free and oblivious, and thought of Lila. As if summoned, her phone buzzed with a text from her granddaughter. "They're watching the clock, Grandma. They think you'll give up pieces of yourself to save time." Ginny's lips curled faintly. She typed back, "They don't realize time is mine to spend, not theirs to take." Later, Rose arrived, Kane tapping against the porch steps as she let herself in. She carried a paper bag with lemon muffins still warm from the oven. The scent filled the kitchen as she set them down, her eyes sharp as ever. "They're circling, aren't they?" Rose asked, settling into a chair. Ginny handed her the printouts of the emails. Rose read them silently, then gave a short laugh. "Let 'em. You've got the lock, they've got the clock. And I don't know anyone who ever won a fight against a lock." They ate muffins in companionable silence, the crumbs sweet and tart on their tongues. The air thick with Charleston's heat. Ginny felt the odd calm of a fortress, quiet but impenetrable. Evening crept in, the cicadas shrilling again as twilight fell. Ginny wheeled to the front hall to retrieve the mail. The envelope slid out of the brass slot, fanning across her lap, a utility bill, a charity flyer, and one thick, glossy brochure. She turned it over, her stomach tightening. "Welcome to Harborview Senior Living, where dignity meets care." The image on the cover showed a smiling older couple holding hands on a landscaped path. But it wasn't the picture that froze her. It was the scrawl of handwriting in the corner, neat and unmistakable. "Thought this might interest you. Trina." Ginny traced the letters with one fingertip, the paper cool and slick. Upstairs, she could hear the faint hum of Lila's music through the floorboards. In her chest, a slow burn ignited, not anger, not yet. Something deeper. She carried the brochure into the study, laid it on her desk, and stared at it under the lamplight. They thought they were offering her options. What they'd really sent was proof. The glossy brochure sat on her desk all night, catching the lamplight like a lure she refused to bite. Harborview Senior Living, where dignity meets care. Each page promised freedom and peace of mind. Wrapped in pastel images of manicured lawns and silver-haired couples laughing on benches. Ginny flipped it open once, the paper slick under her fingertips. A room number was circled in blue pen. Trina's handwriting neat and deliberate. She picked up a red marker instead. Across the cover, in careful block letters, she wrote, "Return to sender." She pressed hard enough that the ink bled through to the smiling faces beneath. The next morning, she tucked the brochure into an envelope, sealed it, and placed it on her lap as she wheeled out to meet Rose. They rode together downtown, the old courthouse's brick facade rising against the bright Charleston sun. The air smelled of heat and car exhaust, sticky against the skin. Inside, Ginny rolled up to the brass postal slot in the courthouse lobby. She held the envelope for a moment longer, her thumb brushing over the flap, before sliding it through. The hollow drop echoed louder than expected, like a door shutting in Trina's face. By afternoon, Lila was waiting at Ginny's desk with a shredder plugged in and ready. There were copies, she explained, holding up 2 duplicates Trina had left in the kitchen. The girl's expression was tight, but her hands steady as she fed the papers in. The machine hummed, chewing the pages into ribbons. The smell of warm paper and ink filled the air. "Feels good," Lila said simply, meeting Ginny's eyes. Rose, perched nearby with her cane across her lap, nodded approval. Don't just fight them, Gin. Ignore them. Let them feel the dead weight of being irrelevant. It burns worse. Ginny smiled faintly, a rare softness touching her face. Irrelevance, she repeated, savoring the word like a glass of good wine. That evening, Eric called to confirm the final drafts of her medical directive. His tone was calm, precise, the voice of someone who understood how much protection lay in details. I filed the directive, he said. Only Lila and Rose are listed. No one else can make a medical decision on your behalf. Not Micah, not Trina, not anyone they put forward. Ginny closed her eyes, picturing Trina standing in some sterile hallway one day, demanding authority that simply didn't exist. She could almost hear the nurse's voice. I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're not on the directive. Good, Ginny replied. That's exactly how I want it. After the call, she sat on the porch, the humid night air clinging to her skin, cicadas buzzing in relentless chorus. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A new text notification. Trina Barrington. You're not being reasonable. Ginny stared at the screen. She could almost picture Trina's fingers tapping the message, the brittle smile she wore when trying to mask anger. Reasonable, Ginny thought. Reasonable was giving them space in her life when they'd already tried to cage her. Reasonable was silence when silence was mistaken for surrender. She typed slowly, each word deliberate. Neither is the trust you're not in. Her thumb pressed send. The message left with a satisfying whoosh, a digital door slamming shut. Ginny set the phone aside, leaned back in her chair, and let the night sounds wash over her. The stars above Charleston glimmered faintly through the haze, indifferent and eternal. For the first time in weeks, she laughed. Not cruelly, not bitterly, but low and certain. The kind of laugh that wasn't performance, but prophecy. The morning air in Charleston was heavy, almost syrup thick, when Ginny rolled into Eric Lawson's office for the third time in as many weeks. The satchel on her lap was lighter than before. No thick wills or binders this time, just one folder with a single goal. To sever the last ties Micah and Trina believed they held. Eric greeted her with his usual calm efficiency. Are you ready? Ginny nodded once. More than ready. The folder opened with a neat rustle of paper. The documents inside weren't as glamorous as a trust, nor as grand as a will, but Ginny knew their weight was immeasurable. These were the permissions she had once granted out of love, or habit, or misplaced trust. The financial and medical powers of attorney Micah had quietly assumed would be his to wield. Eric tapped his pen against the first page. Revocations. This strips Micah of every authority he had. No accounts, no signatures, no medical say. Once filed, its ironclad, Ginny adjusted the glove on her right hand, the pen fitting snug in her grip. She signed slowly but firmly, her name stretching across the line in confident loops. Another page, another signature. Each stroke cut away at Micah's imagined future like a scalpel. The replacements came next, Rose as primary, Lila as backup. Eric explained it briskly, but Ginny hardly needed the details. She already trusted them with her life, and more importantly, with her dignity. Healthcare proxy, Eric asked. Ginny met his eyes. Rose, then Lila. No one else, he nodded. Filed immediately with your physician. That means if anyone tries to override, well, they'll be told no before the ink on their request dries. Ginny almost smiled. The idea of Trina being flatly denied in a doctor's office brought a flicker of satisfaction she didn't bother hiding. By afternoon, the protections were filed, signed, and distributed. Physician, hospital, courthouse, and Eric's office. The old powers of attorney, once kept in Micah's files, were now invalid. Their authority evaporated. That evening, the first ripple came. Ginny was sipping iced tea on her porch when her phone rang. Caller ID, Dr. Fenton's office. She answered, voice cool. Mrs. Barrington, the receptionist said, her tone uneasy. You're Daughter-in-law called earlier, attempting to schedule a neurologist visit on your behalf. She said she had authority to make arrangements. Ginny's lips thinned. And what did you tell her? We checked the records. Only Rose Duval and Lila Barrington are listed. We denied the request. The quiet thrill of victory slid through Ginny's chest like cool water. Thank you, she said simply, before ending the call. Immediately, she forwarded the voicemail transcript and call log to Eric. Subject line: attempted override. Minutes later, his reply came back. Perfect. Exactly the kind of overreach we anticipated. This strengthens everything. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in orange streaks. Lila joined her on the porch, balancing 2 glasses of lemonade. She set one on the table beside Ginny, then sat cross-legged on the steps. You're a fortress now, Lila said quietly, her voice carrying both admiration and relief. Ginny touched the rim of her glass. Fortresses aren't built in a day, but they do stand. The night that followed was deceptively calm. The cicadas hummed. A neighbor's dog barked twice, then fell silent. Ginny went through her evening rituals with practiced precision, closing the safe, locking the doors, arranging her ledger. She told herself the storm had passed for now, but storms have a way of circling back. Dinner the next night was hosted at Micah and Trina's. Ginny wheeled up to the table, greeted by the clink of dishes and the faint scent of rosemary chicken. For a moment, the evening seemed almost ordinary. Then Trina set a plate down in front of her. On the edge of the porcelain, a small round sticker clung. Bright neon yellow, printed in bold black letters, speed limit 0. Trina laughed as if it were the cleverest joke in the world. Micah chuckled weakly, eyes darting to Ginny for her reaction. Ginny's gaze didn't waver. She looked at the plate, then at Trina, her silence sharp as glass. The laughter rang hollow, bouncing in the air between them. Inside, Ginny knew. They thought this was a joke, but it was evidence. And evidence in her hands was always lethal. Ginny lowered her gaze to the plate, her expression steady, her breath measured. The rosemary chicken steam curled upward, filling the air with its savory tang. She cut into it with quiet precision, the scrape of knife against porcelain louder than any protest could have been. Bite by bite, she ate, ignoring the sticker, ignoring Trina's watchful smirk. Inside, she recorded everything. Every tone, every laugh, every silence. Evidence wasn't only kept on paper. It was etched in her memory, reinforced later by careful notes. When dinner ended, Ginny wheeled herself to the parlor, her silence leaving an ache in the air behind her. She didn't glance back at the table, didn't acknowledge the joke, didn't reward it with anger. That night, under the lamplight of her study, she opened her ledger and wrote a neat, steady script. This is what exclusion looks like. The words glowed on the page, both documentation and declaration. She folded the note carefully, slid it into her side letter file, and locked it in the binder. Rose stopped by the next morning, kind tapping rhythmically as she entered. Ginny didn't speak at first. She simply placed the dinner plate, stickers still affixed, on the table. Rose tilted her head, a sharp smile tugging at her mouth. They're not clever. They're desperate. Without another word, she pulled out her phone and snapped a photo. The shutter clicked, capturing not just the insult, but the proof of its existence. She sent the image to both her cloud backup and Eric within seconds. There, Rose said, satisfied. Backed up in 3 places. Let them deny it, Ginny allowed herself a small exhale, a release without weakness. Good. That evening, Ginny opened her funeral directive. The document had been drafted years earlier, back when she'd assumed tradition would carry her through. Family pews, formal invitations, flowers chosen by committee. She read the old words with detachment, then crossed them out in firm strokes. In their place, she wrote new instructions, private, no invites, buried with dignity, not spectacle. Let the quiet say more than any eulogy. Lila found her still at the desk, pen resting beside the paper. She lingered in the doorway, uncertain. "You're really cutting them out? Even at the end?" Ginny turned, her gaze steady, voice low but unwavering. "I've never been sure." For a moment, Lila said nothing. Then she crossed the room and pressed her forehead lightly to Ginny's shoulder, an unspoken pledge. By week's end, Eric confirmed the updates. They met in his office, the air cool with the scent of lemon polish, the blinds cutting stripes of sunlight across the oak table. He flipped through the binder with meticulous care. "Every directive is now complete," he said. "Trust finalized, medical protections active, funeral instructions revised. Everything is legally sound. If they push, they hit a wall." Ginny nodded once, the weight of his words sinking in like anchors into the harbor floor. "Good." Then the matter's settled. She left his office lighter, not because the fight was over, but because she had ensured its outcome. That night, as she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. The name on the message froze her hand in place. Cynthia Barrington, Trina's sister. The message was short, its casual tone more unsettling than if it had been cruel. "They think you're slipping." Ginny stared at the words, her chest tightening, not from fear, but from recognition. The whispers had started to spread. Trina wasn't just mocking her in private anymore. She was weaving a narrative. And narratives, Ginny knew, could be just as dangerous as signatures. So Ginny called Dr. Fenton's office herself. "I want a full cognitive evaluation," she told the receptionist. "And I want it documented, witnessed, and on record." The appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Ginny chose to wear a tailored blazer over her blouse, pearls at her ears, hair set in its usual soft waves. Appearances mattered, but this wasn't just about vanity. This was war by perception, and she wouldn't show up looking like prey. The exam room smelled faintly of disinfectant and lemon polish. Sunlight poured through the blinds, cutting bright stripes across the floor. Dr. Fenton entered with a clipboard, his manner brisk but kind. "We'll run through a series of tests," he explained. "Memory, reasoning, orientation, language, problem-solving. Just answer naturally." Ginny gave him a thin smile. "Naturally is my specialty." The test began. He asked her to recite lists of words, to repeat them back in order. She did without hesitation. He asked her to subtract sevens backward from 100. Her voice stayed steady, 93, 86, 79. He gave her a short paragraph to recall later, tested her recognition of shapes, asked her to draw a clock. Ginny's pen moved across the page with slow precision, her circles neat, her numbers placed just so. The final question was simple but telling. "Who is the current governor of South Carolina?" Ginny raised an eyebrow. "Henry McMaster. And if you'd like, I can give you his last 3 predecessors too." She listed them without pause. When the test ended, Dr. Fenton removed his glasses, studying her with quiet respect. "Mrs. Barrington," he said, "you passed with clarity and precision. Not a single red flag." "I wasn't expecting one," Ginny replied, her tone flat but edged. By the next day, the official report, signed, sealed, and stamped, was forwarded to Eric. The language was crisp. "Patient demonstrates full cognitive capacity, capable of making independent decisions regarding personal, medical, and financial matters." Eric called as soon as it hit his desk. "This is gold," he said. "We'll attach it directly to the trust file. If they try to paint you as unstable, we've got a physician's certification. A fortress inside the fortress." Ginny allowed herself the faintest smile. "Good. Then when they come with whispers, the paper will shout louder." That evening, Rose arrived with a bakery box, the scent of lemon sugar filling the kitchen. She poured sparkling mocktails into tall glasses, the bubbles fizzing bright against the dim light. "To passing with flying colors," Rose toasted. Ginny clinked her glass against hers. The first sip was tart, cutting, but softened quickly by sweetness. Lila joined them at the table, fork in hand, pulling a generous slice of lemon pie from the box. "They're going to be so shocked," Lila said. her eyes dancing with a mix of mischief and loyalty. Ginny cut her own slice carefully, the crust crumbling under the fork. "They already are," she said, calm and sure. "They just don't know it yet." The night was warm, laughter light in the kitchen, the scent of pie and sugar hanging in the air. For a moment, it felt like a family gathering without venom, an echo of what life could have been if cruelty hadn't rotted it. But peace never lasted long in the Barrington household. The next afternoon, as Ginny sorted through mail at the kitchen counter, the front door creaked open. She frowned. No one had knocked. The footsteps that followed were too heavy to be Lila's, too hesitant to be Rose's. Micah stood in the doorway like a man bracing himself for a storm. His tie was loose, his hair combed back too neatly, the scent of his cologne a little too strong, as if he had dabbed it on to cover nerves. "Let's walk," he said, gesturing toward the back garden. Ginny considered him for a moment, her fingers resting lightly on the armrest of her chair. "Very well," she said, her voice even. She wheeled beside him, the soft hum of the chair's motors blending with the crunch of his shoes on the brick path. The garden smelled of damp soil and roses, the kind of air that clung to the lungs. Cicadas buzzed in the magnolia trees. Micah shoved his hands into his pockets, keeping his gaze fixed ahead. "Look, Mom," he began, forcing a chuckle. "Things have been tense lately. Maybe too tense. I think we should just reset things." Ginny said nothing. Her hand slipped casually into the pocket of her blazer, where her phone had already been switched to record. The small red light glowed unseen. Micah cleared his throat. "You know Trina, she can be sharp sometimes, but she's under stress too. She means well. We both just want to make sure you're comfortable, that you're cared for, that you don't have to worry about all the paperwork and money things." Ginny guided her chair a few feet ahead, turning just enough to let him catch her profile. "All the paperwork and money things?" she repeated, her tone neutral, but edged. Micah winced, then tried another angle. "I just mean, when you're gone, I want to make sure Trina's taken care of. She's been putting in so much, and she deserves stability." Ginny stopped her chair, the roses framing her like a stage backdrop. She looked at him fully now, her eyes steady, unblinking. "She is taken care of," Ginny said, "in a way." The words hung in the heavy air, their ambiguity deliberate. Micah shifted uncomfortably as though the ground had shifted under him. His smile faltered, and for a flicker of a moment, the mask cracked. "Well, good," he muttered, glancing away toward the trees. "That's good." Ginny didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence was thicker than any lecture, and Micah filled it with nervous words about market conditions, about real estate values, about how hard it was to hold everything together. She let him talk, every word captured in the phone's memory, his tone, his phrasing, even the hesitation when he mentioned "after you're gone." When the walk ended, he patted her shoulder awkwardly. "Glad we talked, Mom. Fresh start, right?" Ginny gave him the faintest smile, the kind that showed nothing. "Right." He left through the side gate, his cologne fading with his footsteps. As soon as the latch clicked, Ginny rolled into the study, removed the phone from her pocket, and saved the file to her Barrington archive. She typed the label with precise keystrokes. Garden Talk, September, attempted reset. With one click, she forwarded the file to Eric. A second click to Rose. The responses came swiftly. From Eric, "Excellent, another piece of the puzzle. He's showing motive." From Rose, "Sharp work, Gin. He thinks he's whispering, but you've got the megaphone." Ginny leaned back in her chair, the air of the study carrying the faint smell of polished oak and old paper. Her silence wasn't passive. It was decisive. The conversation Micah thought private was now sealed, time-stamped, indelible. Upstairs, Lila's phone buzzed with a new notification. She frowned at the screen, then hurried down the staircase, her sneakers squeaking on the wood. "Grandma," she said, holding out her phone. On the screen, a Snapchat from Trina glared in neon letters, the caption bold and venomous. Almost showtime, Cripple Queen. The morning light slanted through the lace curtains of Ginny's study, illuminating the stack of papers on her desk like holy writ. She slid her arthritis glove onto her right hand, flexing her fingers until the leather stretched and softened. The glove squeaked faintly as she tested the pen, its weight familiar, steady. This wasn't just ink, it was a weapon. At 10:45 a.m., Rose arrived, cane striking a confident rhythm against the hardwood. She carried a thermos of coffee under one arm and set it down without ceremony. "You ready, Gin?" Ginny gave her a thin smile. "I've been ready since the night she called me Cripple." 5 minutes later, Lila hurried in from school, her backpack slung off one shoulder. She looked flushed, as if she'd sprinted the last block, strands of hair sticking to her forehead. "I didn't want to miss this," she said, breathless. At 11 o'clock sharp, the notary knocked on the door. A woman in a pressed navy blazer, leather case in hand. She entered with professional detachment, the smell of rain clinging to her clothes, and laid out her stamp, seal, and logbook on the desk. Eric Lawson had couriered the documents the day before, the final trust restatement, precise and ruthless. Ginny turned each page slowly, the paper cool and stiff beneath her fingertips. Every clause gleamed with finality. Micah and Trina removed from all inheritance. Formal bar from contesting. Executor, Rose. Beneficiary, Lila at 25. Protective trusts and directives layered like armor. "Mrs. Barrington," the notary said, her tone brisk but respectful. "If you're satisfied with the contents, you may begin." Ginny adjusted her glove, straightened her shoulders, and signed. The pen scratched across the page, her loops and lines, deliberate, precise, undeniable. Each stroke was a severing, a cord cut, a tie undone. Rose and Lila leaned in, watching not with pity, but reverence. Witnesses not just to legality, but to justice. Page after page, she signed, the sound of the pen steady as a heartbeat. When the last sheet was complete, the notary pressed her seal into the corner, the crack of the embosser echoing like a gavel. "It is executed," the notary said, sliding the logbook forward. Rose and Lila signed their names as witnesses, their handwriting bold beside Ginny's looping script. Ginny sat back, exhaling slowly. The air smelled of ink and leather, faintly metallic. Her hand trembled slightly, but not from weakness, from release. Rose squeezed her shoulder. "That's it, Gin. They can't touch a penny. Not a chair leg. Not a spoon." Lila's eyes shone, her voice hushed with awe. "You just erased their power. Forever." Ginny's lips curved into a smile, sharp and calm. And it only took a signature. The notary gathered her tools, packed her case, and left with the efficiency of someone who witnessed history daily without comment. Ginny, however, knew this was no ordinary signing. This was the moment Trina and Micah's imagined futures collapsed into ash. By afternoon, copies were already distributed. One filed at the courthouse, another secured in Eric's office, a third locked in Ginny's fireproof safe at home. The trust binder sat heavy on her lap as she rolled the safe door shut, spinning the dial until the lock clicked. She sat in the hush of the study afterward, the rain still lingering in the air, the scent of damp earth drifting through the window. For the first time in months, her body felt lighter than her chair. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Ginny glanced down, expecting perhaps Eric confirming receipt. But the name that lit the screen was Trina. The message unfurled in faux cheerful text, punctuated with a smiley face. "Let's do a family photo before the holidays." Ginny stared at it, her smile tightening into something cold. A photo. A portrait of a family Trina believed she still commanded. But Ginny knew better. The family was no longer Trina's to frame. The text came from Lila late on a Saturday morning, accompanied by a screenshot. Ginny opened it slowly, though she already suspected what she would see. There they were, Micah in a tailored jacket, Trina in her flawless cream sweater. Lila pulled reluctantly into frame, her shoulders stiff, The dining room wallpaper glowed warmly behind them, the same wallpaper Ginny had chosen decades ago. Her absence was the loudest part of the picture. The caption read, "Strong genes, stronger future." Ginny's lips thinned as she studied the words. No mention of her, no acknowledgement of the woman who had built the house, chosen the wallpaper, and curated the antiques that filled the room. The photo wasn't about family, it was propaganda. A second message from Lila followed. Sending to Eric too. Annotated. Ginny imagined Eric opening it at his desk, reading Lila's sharp little notes. Grandma excluded again. Caption implies generational continuity without her, evidence of intent. The thought gave Ginny a quiet sense of satisfaction. The girl had inherited more than her eyes. She'd inherited her precision. The house smelled faintly of polish that morning. Rose had been by earlier, dusting and straightening as if preparing a stage. Ginny rolled to her desk, the wheels whispering across the rug, and pulled a new folder from her satchel. Inside was something she had been drafting for weeks, a philanthropic grant. The recipient, a disability advocacy fund in Charleston. The donor name, Virginia Barrington. The honoree line, in the name of Trina Barrington. She read the dedication again, the words sharp and gleaming. This is what your cruelty built. Something good. Signing the grant was not like signing the trust. There was no embosser crack, no notary, just her name in blue ink, steady despite the stiffness in her hand. She slipped the signed copy into an envelope, sealing it with calm deliberation. Somewhere, children would get equipment. Adults would receive legal aid. Families would be supported. And every success story would carry Trina's name. Rose returned in the afternoon, her cane clicking against the floor. She saw the envelope on the desk and raised an eyebrow. What's this then? Ginny handed it over without a word. Rose unfolded the document, her eyes skimming the lines. When she reached the dedication, she let out a bark of laughter that startled even Ginny. "Oh, Gin," she said, eyes shining. "This is iconic revenge. Eternal. She'll never wash it off." Ginny gave a small nod, her face calm, her eyes sharp. Good. Then it settled. The rest of the day passed in quiet rhythm. Lila working on homework upstairs. Rose gossiping idly about a mutual acquaintance's disastrous estate sale. The smell of lemon oil lingered in the air, mingling with the faint tang of rain drifting in from the open window. Ginny filed the grant papers away with the same deliberate care she gave every document. Evidence, legacy, and spite. All in one. That evening, the phone rang. Eric's voice carried the gravity of finality, even through the line. "Mrs. Barrington," he said, "probate court has reviewed and certified the trust. It's now complete and irrevocable. No loopholes, no reversals, no room for contest." Ginny closed her eyes. For a moment, she let herself simply breathe. The sound of cicadas filling the silence outside. The faint creak of the old house settling around her. "Thank you, Eric," she said. Her tone was level, but inside, something loosened. Not victory, not triumph. Something quieter, sturdier. Dignity, reclaimed in full. She set the phone down, folded her hands in her lap, and let the quiet fill the room. Somewhere, Trina was posting photos, curating her stage. And, somewhere, a court had erased her future with a single certification. Ginny smiled. Not for the camera, but for herself. The late afternoon sun slanted across the Barrington porch, throwing amber light across the worn planks. Ginny sat with her feet propped on a low stool, her wheelchair parked neatly beside her like a loyal companion. The air was thick with Charleston humidity, carrying the scent of honeysuckle and the faint salt of the harbor breeze. On the wicker table beside her rested the black leather trust binder. Its weight was more than paper. It was the weight of decisions made, protections signed, futures rewritten. Ginny reached out and rested her hand lightly on it, feeling the firmness through the cover. Inside, Lila clattered pans in the kitchen. The smell of butter and sugar drifted out through the screen door, rich and comforting. Ginny listened to her granddaughter humming softly to herself as she baked, a girl building her own rhythm, unaware of how much steel she carried beneath her quiet voice. Beside the binder sat an envelope, its edges sharp and deliberate. Across the front, in Ginny's unmistakable handwriting, the words, "To be read, not contested." She had written the letter the night before, her pen moving slow but steady, her thoughts as crisp as ever. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't an explanation, it was a record, one last message of control. The sound of a cane tapping announced Rose's arrival. She crossed the porch with her usual confidence, dropped into the chair beside Ginny, and handed over a small stack of printed papers. "Chloe finished updating the archive folder," Rose said, a hint of pride in her voice. "Every photo, every message, every insult, they're backed up, organized, and printed. One set for the safe deposit box, one for Eric." Ginny flipped through the pages slowly, the faint smell of ink and fresh paper rising with each turn. There was Trina's laugh, captured in transcript. The dinner sticker, the Facebook captions, all of it undeniable. "They thought they were documenting my decline," Ginny murmured. "But I was documenting their character." Rose smirked. "And character collapses faster than bone." A neighbor strolled by on the sidewalk below, waving as he passed. "Mrs. Barrington, how are you doing these days?" Ginny straightened her shoulders, her pearls catching the sunlight. "I'm better than fine," she called back, her voice carrying steady across the humid air. The neighbor tipped his hat and kept walking, none the wiser to the fortress sitting quietly on her porch. A few minutes later, Lila emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands onto her jeans. She set a plate of warm cookies on the table, their chocolate still melting at the edges. Her eyes darted to the binder, then back to her grandmother. "They called you Crippled," she said softly, but with a fierceness that belied her age. "But you crushed them." Ginny picked up a cookie, its heat still lingering against her fingertips. She took a bite, the chocolate rich, the sugar sharp, and let the sweetness melt across her tongue. She looked at Lila, then at Rose, then at the binder. "My daughter-in-law laughed when I got a wheelchair and called me Cripple," she said, her voice calm, certain, final. "So I crippled her future with one signature,